Salutations, fellow thinkers and drinkers. Okay, another subscriber request on this occasion. And another Deep Purple album to review. This time, their 2003 release, Bananas. Now, already in recent videos, when I've discussed the Rapture of the Deep remix as well as my look on Abandon, I did give quite a lot of background, actually, in setting the scene, especially on the Rapture of the Deep video on Bananas. So I'm not going to repeat all that again, but just a brief recap. It was their first album in 5 years, since Abandon, and as I've said, that 5-year gap had, in my opinion, cost them some momentum. Also, it was the first album without John Lord, ever, so first with Don Airey in the band. Now, if this is not outright pressure on the band, there's certainly an enhanced curiosity factor at play here. And interestingly, it is the first album since Come Taste the Band in 1976, where the band are going to use an outside producer, independent producer. In that case, obviously, Martin Birch. In this case, Michael Bradford. So, for many reasons, an highly anticipated release, I think, at least in my case, certainly, and I think also among the fan base. Perhaps this had been increased by Gillan's comments at the time that it was about time the band recorded their Sgt. Pepper. Anyway, what did we get? Well, the album opens with House of Pain. Now, this just may be a personal prejudice, but every time I hear a cowbell, I get nervous. Experience tells me that this is usually indicative of a song with pronounced deficiencies. Add to that a generic title, a very generic riff. Could be AI constructed this in some way, you know. Just ask AI. Produce something that sounds like a classic rock band from the 70s around 2003 or something. Yeah, very generic riff. A very generic construction to the song. And one could see that my fears perhaps are about to be realized. Well, yes and no. I mean, the song has a decent pulse to it. There's a tight groove. Nice solo from Don Airey. Gillan's vocal melody does actually give it a little bit of identity. A little bit of something you can hang your hat on, as it were. Some life to it, perhaps. I don't know. Otherwise, it's fairly dull, fairly placid, fairly staid. I would describe it as efficient rather than expansive or expressive. But I have to say, in their long career, this is up there with King of Dreams as their weakest album opener yet. Unfortunately. Not a great start. Alright, we move on to Sun Goes Down, which is much darker, much more atmospheric, little foreboding perhaps. Slower tempo, which certainly suits that type of feel, I think. Very layered keyboards from Airey. Brooding vocal line really does give it some weight. This is slightly proggy. It's dramatic, it's different, and it's challenging. Steve Morse keeps his guitar parts restrained, I think, on this one. And it's more textured, I think. He's not so dominant. This is very much Don Airey's song, I think. But certainly one, at least until the end. But it's certainly one the most dramatic tracks on the album. And I think it's very strong, very interesting. Though perhaps it could have been developed a little further. Just as you think this is about to go somewhere, they fade it out. Somewhere here, this was the first 2/3 of a longer piece, which may really have hit the sweet spot. But as it is, okay, I still like it. It's a good song. Okay, Haunted. A power ballad. Oh, as close to it Yeah, well, too close for comfort, isn't it? I mean, Christ on a bike, what were they thinking? What possessed them? In construction, it's a mid-tempo ballad. It leans heavily on melody, and the arrangement just emphasizes its softness and its lack of substance, if you like. No real emotion to this, either in the vocal or in the chords or anything like that. It is very by the numbers. Gillan's vocals do sit comfortably within that space, but the lyrics are really poor on this. Rhyming haunted with wanted. I mean, God, I don't know. And Beth Hart on backing vocals is, I think, the only time that an outsider has provided backing vocals on any Deep Purple recording, is utterly wasted. She's got a great voice. I don't know if she's just been put in for name recognition value. I don't know, but you can hear her, but she's utterly wasted. You had her in the studio. You could have done a duet with her or something. At least it would have been something different. I suppose you could argue it's tasteful. But it's just over-polished, isn't it? Well, anyway, okay, that's the positive spin on the album. On the song. The sad reality is, this is far too trite and cliched for Deep Purple. It does not quite produce the same visceral feeling of contempt as did Love Conquers All. But that is hardly a compliment, is it? No, this doesn't work. Okay, up next, Razzle Dazzle. Playful, upbeat rocker. Definite swing in the rhythm, can't deny it. Chorus is, okay, accessible. It sticks quickly, I guess. Very light on depth, but you could perhaps argue, it's effective on charm and energy. Well, you could argue that, but I'm afraid that's very much the glass is half full. Look at this. And again, the reality is that this is simply a vapid, vacuous nothing of a song. There's no memorable leads or instrumental contributions from Morse or Airy, and the only saving grace of this thing is that it doesn't exceed 3.5 minutes. It could have been worse. We will get to that later. Now, upon first listen of this album, I was getting worried by this point. Sun Goes Down had a lot of promise, and in fact, it is a damn good song. But the other three... Okay, we proceed. Silver Tongue, sharper and more aggressive, which is good. And finally a song that actually rocks, which is good. Taut riff defines the track, but very punchy rhythm section. Sort of jerky start-stop, but it's effective. Don Airey, again, very prominent on this. His keyboards give it a modern edge. There's a lot of Hammond on it still, but I don't know if he's combining it with a synth or something, but he's got his own sound on this one, and as I said, it for the time at least, it sounded more modern, but it sounds good, it sounds fresh, invigorating. Gillan delivers a good vocal for once. Well, for once on this album. On this one, more focused, more committed vocal, I would say. There's a little bit more edge to his delivery. He did have that on, not Silver Tongue, the other one, I've forgotten the second track already. Sun Goes Down, my God, I'm getting old. But on the other three, his vocals have been very non-committal, shall we say. All right, I like this. It's not Seventh Heaven. It's not that good. It really isn't. But it does have its charms. Though, again, I have to say, this could have been better. Okay, Walk On, which is apparently mostly written by Michael Bradford, the producer. Let's look, it's reflective, quieter, but what is effectively a standard, out-of-the-middle draw-type blues construction sort of thing. I mean, there's certainly nothing revelatory about this. Morse is quite restrained on it, although he plays very well, I have to say. As does Airy. It's understated, musically coherent, Decent vocals from Gillan. Not much of a melody, though. Not much of a hook on the chorus. Nothing. It's there, but it's just... It's like everything on this song. It is just, in all conceivable ways, unexceptional. And that's damning for Deep Purple. It really is. And it goes on far too long. As I said earlier, at least I was hoping, I suppose, or that Sun Goes Down, they could have developed... That ended too early, shall we say. That had scope to be developed. This one goes on for at least 2.5 minutes, far too long. To absolutely no end whatsoever. It doesn't enhance the song anything. I think it's 7 minutes something. The longest song on the album could easily have had 2.5, maybe 3 minutes cut off it. You wouldn't have noticed the difference. So far, not so great, is it? Okay, Pictures of Innocence, which is one of the album's livelier moments, I have to say. And there is finally some aggression back. Very bright guitar lines, very powerful guitar lines, very strong chorus, very good build-up from the verses into the chorus, into the middle eight. Really good musical dynamics, which have largely been missing thus far. Nice to see them back. There's a tangible sense of, say, forward momentum within this song. It's going somewhere. It tells its own little musical story from start to finish. I like it. I really do. Gillan's best lyrics thus far, and his best vocal thus far. Some good solos from Morse on this one particularly, and it feels organic, and it feels kind of spontaneous. And I'd have to say it's easily the best thing on the album thus far. Okay, the next track is, I've Got Your Number. Now, I caught this live prior to the album being released, when it was still called Up the Wall. And Gillan amusingly introduced it on stage as being about a pissing contest. And I distinctly remember thinking, okay, this is a work in progress, but it was powerful. It had great dynamics in it, strong chorus, and yes, okay, looking forward to hearing this once they record it. Here it sounds neutered, emasculated even. And I'm tempted to say that's down to the production, a subject I will return to later. The title, I've Got Your Number, is far too trite and cliched for Deep Purple. Up the Wall was at least a slightly off-the-wall title. But I've Got Your Number. Really? And the times Gillan repeats that phrase, I've got your number, almost ad infinitum in this song. It really gets on my nerves. Having said that, the bridge section, as it was when I first heard it live, remains very powerful and compelling. Really good interplay between Airy and Morse on this one, both rhythmically and their respective solos. They sound really like a band here. This is much tighter. You have the feeling that they spent more time on this than they did many of the other tracks. Although, despite the criticisms I've made, and I stand by them, because I do think it still should have been better than this somehow. And it did sound so much better in its early incarnation live. It still remains one of the best things on offer. Okay, Never a Word up next. This is a really beautiful, quiet, acoustic, leaning interlude, light, almost folk-tinged, ethereal perhaps, and Gillan delivering a warm and relaxed vocal, which is now, by the way, his best vocal on the album. It does provide contrast, most certainly, although one could argue its brevity makes it feel more like a mood piece or a palate cleanser than a full song. I just love the fact that they felt confident enough not only to compose something like this, but to include it. It's actually joyous. I really enjoy listening to it. Again, one could argue that this perhaps could have been developed. Or And I sometimes think that yes, perhaps it could have been further developed, but listening to it sometimes on other occasions, it's perfect just the way it is. Yeah, if I was compiling my best of the purple, blah, 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 I'd have to find space for this in there somewhere. I really would. Okay, the title track up next, which is funky, slightly eccentric, keyboard driven, but it's fast, it's driving, and it's apparently in some bizarre time signature. Airy, very dominant on this, and these keyboards give it a quirky rhythmic bounce, which I really like. It's experimental and heavy at the same time, and I have to say it really hits the spot. But again, it fades out. Yeah. Slight feeling of unfinishedness about it, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being hypercritical. But most certainly, this is chock full of personality, this song. And more like this, and much less of some of the other stuff, I think would have been very welcome indeed. All right, we're going to move on to Doing It Tonight, which is a more straightforward, groove-led rocker. It's built on a tight rhythmic figure and a pretty engaging riff, I have to say. It's nothing revelatory, but it is a lot of fun. The emphasis much more on feel and momentum. Glover and Pace keep it locked down, while Morse and Airy add colour and vibrancy to it. Gillen's, it was another good performance, and his lyrics, while fun, are getting a little bit long in the tooth by this point. Yeah. You all know what I mean. I don't have to go into detail. It's a good one. I like it. It's certainly by no means a standout Deep Purple composition, but it's not one you can complain about. It's fun. And the album finishes obviously with Contact Lost, which was Morse's short instrumental. Very emotional playing, and it does sort of tug the heartstrings. It has that effect. Not surprising, given the motivation. It was dedicated to those astronauts who died in the space shuttle, Columbia, was it? Or Challenger? Columbia, I think. And so it delivers its message very well. Is it just long enough? Could they have expanded this one a little bit? It is kind of short. Again, I don't know. I don't know about that. Might just be that it says all it has to say, and it's 1 minute 45 seconds. And that was that. Couple of things of note. Two note. Since Abandoned, the band had played another song live at least a couple of times. Long Time Gone. I seem to remember it was a pretty good, decent rock song. And obviously, Morse's instrumental tour de force, a well-dressed guitar, was recorded at this point, but not included on the album. It would eventually feature on the second disc of some touring edition of Rapture of the Deep. Well, in hindsight, I would much rather have heard the well-dressed guitar than certain songs on this album. But we can understand maybe not, why they didn't want to go for an instrumental. Who knows? All right, so much for the songs. Now, in terms of production, I didn't like it at the time, and I still do not. Why? Well, it's competent, but it is very flawed. And these flaws really do, and I think do shape my perception of the album. Sound is overall, it's too dry, it's too compressed, it's too bright, and strangely narrow. Too tinny, too mid-ranged, very much lacking in bottom end. And that cannot help the material. It really can't. Slightly more specifically on that, as far as the drums are concerned, and I do think they suffer the most, as the kit is captured with, how would I say, a clinical clarity, but no sense of space, no sense of dynamic to the sound of it. It doesn't resonate. Snare is sharp, but it lacks body. Toms are too thin. The bass drum, surprisingly soft in the mix, occasionally missing. Feels as though the drums were literally boxed in. It's technically, I don't know, but it's probably a competent recording. I don't know, but it's just, it doesn't sound natural. It really doesn't. Well, the swing is I guess, is still there, inherent in the songs, but the drums don't resonate the way I like them to. They don't sound organic. Steve Morse is not well served here. It could have been a conscious choice that, okay, we've got the new boy in the band. We're gonna push him up in the mix or let him dominate. But this is not Steve Morse's album. In terms of playing, even, but in terms of production, his guitar tone is not impressive here. It's too clean, too articulate, and the mix far too often pushes it too far back. And again, vis-a-vis Airy. Whenever Airy's doing something, Morse disappears. You should be able to hear them in balance, in some sort of balance. Makes some of the songs sound a bit thin, because there's that certain rhythmical counterbalance to whatever the other's doing is missing. And it lacks the warmth it certainly had on Perpendicular and Abandon. Especially in the heavier places, it feels underpowered, underweight. And in the quieter moments, it sounds a little sterile. And I don't think this is Morse's finest hour as a player with Deep Purple, but certainly in terms of where his guitar's positioned in the mix and the tone of it, it's pretty mediocre, I'd have to say. Conversely, Airy's all over this. He really is. He's very dominant in the mix. But occasionally, as I've already alluded to, this tips the balance, unfortunately, and it loses its equilibrium. Pushes Morse out far too often, but he's more than Lord. He's prepared to use synthesizers, for textures and stuff like that, rather than just being, the Hammond organ player. He seems far more prepared and willing, keen to do that than was Lord. But while his playing is very good, and quite rightly, he's given some prominence at the mix, it's the balance of the mix that gives him a disproportionate sound at the expense of some of the other instruments, which gives some of the songs an off-kilter feel that you can almost hear there is something missing here. Which brings us nicely to the bass. It's clear, but it lacks any real heft. The tone is far too mid-range focus. Does it aid clarity? I don't know. You can hear some, but it's actually you can't actually. Thinking about it, it's not clear what he's playing at all, often, and diminishes the groove somehow. And so when I'm talking about bass, it's not just necessarily the individual notes, although one should be able to hear what the musician is doing, but the frequencies are also missing, which it pushes the overall sound far too far into the mid range. Not a great bass sounding album. Gillan was recorded cleanly, and he's pushed pretty much forward in the mix, I'd have to say. I don't think he has too much to complain about. Upper frequencies seem to be emphasized. Now, I don't know. I'm not a recording engineer, but there's just something. I don't think his vocals have sounded like this before or since. And I can't explain it. I really can't. But his voice lacks the character it normally has too often here, and I don't know why. I really don't. It could be him. He may have had a cold. Who knows? He may have deliberately changed his singing style. I really don't know. But he sounds thinner than he normally does. And his voice lacks that gravitas that he still manages to convey to this day. Don't like this at all. And the mix itself is cautious, but unbalanced. Deep Purple music thrives on. They're a band of musicians. They thrive on the internal dynamics of which they, as part of their songwriting process. I've discussed this before. They jam their ideas out. And I've also discussed the pros and cons of doing this, but it's the interplay between them. Riffing off each other. That drum fill there sounds like a good idea. Those spontaneous bits. But this mix just puts everybody, sounds like they're occupying the same physical space. And a lot of it's missing. It doesn't sound expansive enough. You can't hear everybody in balance. Every instrument should be, audible, shouldn't it? But, no, it's not a good mix. It really isn't. And the mastering is it's very loud, it's very compressed, it's very brittle sounding, I would say. Peaks are controlled tightly, but that reduces dynamic contrast. It really does. There's no bottom end to this. And it's got a smooth, shall we say, radio-ready, radio-friendly veneer to it, but it sounds sterile. I remember at the time, my thoughts at the time were, this sounds awful. Compare it to Abandon. Whatever one may think of the music contained within, I think Roger Glover did a very good production job on that. And at the time of the release of Bananas, I thought he'd have done a better job. And having said that, if I'm being honest at this point, I would have to say that the experiment of using an outside producer has not borne fruit, and there are, to my ears, no tangible benefits. Certainly not in terms of production. Exactly what influence Michael Bradford had as the outside producer in terms of the songwriting, I'm not that sure. I don't know if he was involved as, say, Bob Ezrin went on to be in later years. But as I've already indicated, there are some pretty unflattering compositions contained within this record. And I have to say, thinking about it now, what really bugs me about this production is it lacks character. It really does. It's the man in grey. It lacks character. In commercial terms, according to research, I think Bananas is suspected of selling something with 300 to 350,000 units worldwide over time. Upon release, it entered the charts primarily in territories where Deep Purple had maintained a strong audience. Since the Reformation, shall we say. It peaked at 3 in Germany, which is obviously one of the band's strongest markets. It reached top 10 in Finland, the Czech Republic, and it charted in other European places, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, and even Argentina. It went gold in Russia, no less, which means to go gold in Russia, at least in 2003, 10,000 sales. Rather puts that sort of thing in perspective, does it not? But I'm assuming this would have been about par for the course for any classic rock band releasing a new album in 2003. Already the sales of physical media were down. That trend had been well and truly established. I don't know what sales expectations were necessarily, but I've got a feeling what they actually achieved. And I'm, as far as I can ascertain, it did sell better than Abandon. Which brings me on to another point. When I made the video on Abandon, I made an error, a factual error. I did state that EMI dropped them after Abandon, and I speculate that was in part down to its relatively poor commercial performance. No, they didn't. They dropped them after Bananas, rather. And I seem to remember that at the time that there was, I know, it's the bullshit they put out in the press, obviously, but they were really pleased with this result, and they were making it something, a priority release. I forget exactly how they termed it. So why then they were dropped after Bananas rather than before it, I don't know. As I said, as far as I understand, it sold roughly what it should have sold. I can't imagine anybody, ordered 1 million copies of this to be pressed and was left with egg on their face. I think it probably did, and maybe even slightly exceeded what was expected of it. So why this led to the termination with the record company, I don't know. Not that it matters. So that was that. So what do I think of it all these years later? Well, as you probably gather, I was not that enthusiastic at the time, and that feeling has remained. And to be honest, back then I was starting to think that maybe they'd lost it. But the trend from Perpendicular, really strong songs, vibrant, fantastic album. Abandoned, too dark, too focused. As I said, there's parts of that I really love, but it didn't take off. And then we get this. It's easily the worst of the three, in my opinion. Yes. If you take my comments on Abandon, that it was too focused, we're going to write heavy rocking songs. So, well, anyway, that's what they said. At the expense, of the more variety, the more varied style of composition and influence. Well, okay. They had gone back to that. They'd embraced more variety of style on this one. But whereas that worked on Perpendicular, it doesn't work here. Why? Well, it's quite simple, really. The songs on Perpendicular are much, much stronger. And the album as a whole feels cohesive. The Aviator sits well alongside, sometimes I feel like screaming Ted the Mechanic, Cascades, A Castle Full of Rascals, etc. So, as does A Touch Away. It feels natural. It feels organic and cohesive. This feels different. It feels directionless. I don't know why. It just does. It does not work as a cohesive record. This disjointed, and fundamentally there are just too many weak tracks. It starts really well. I said, House of Pain is not a great opener. I said that I've praised Sun Goes Down, and I'll stick to that, but that's followed by a series of fairly mediocre efforts until we get to Pictured Within and I've Got Your Number, about which I still found reason to complain, but there you go. It ends better than it starts. But again, is there anything on here that if you were asked to put you've got that double CD best of post Blackmore recordings, from Perpendicular through to Equals One. Is there anything on this that is absolutely demanding to be included on that? Very little. I mean, I would go out to bat for never a word. But again, so that's not typical of the album, is it? One could perhaps argue the title track or Pictures of Innocence, but no. I'm sorry, there is just nothing on here demanding to be included in that, on that sort of release. There just isn't. Okay, and I was so disappointed with it at the time. For the first time in many years, I skipped that touring cycle. But I saw, anything from Abandon or Perpendicular had been discarded, so they were going to play whatever they were going to play from this. Plus, well, we all know what. And I said, I don't need to see this. And I didn't. And I didn't see them again until the Rapture of the Deep tour touring cycle started. But, no. Yeah, it is not without its merit. I've highlighted a few songs that I think are good, strong, but nothing on here I could describe as essential, and it is the post-Blackmore album that I do play the least. I haven't heard it for a few years now, and I obviously gave it a spin just prior to recording this. And I have to say, my opinions actually probably deteriorated from what I had in my mind. I think it's actually worse than I remembered, unfortunately. Now, it does leave one question hanging here, doesn't it? Given what happened recently with Rapture of the Deep, when that remix came out. Would a remix of Bananas help? Well, I have to be honest. I mean, I was totally taken aback by the difference that the Rapture of the Deep remix made. I really was. So I have to accept the possibility that in this case it would also make a difference. But I have to say that there are just too many weak tracks on here. You could make them sound better, and given a better overall sound, you may give some of them more impact. But in my opinion, across, from start to finish, this is a much weaker album than Rapture of the Deep. And the weaker moments on Rapture of the Deep, which for me were primarily Don't Let Go, so Don't Look Now, is it Don't Let Go? Don't Let, and Back to Back, are still stronger than the weaker moments on here. I mean, Razzle Dazzle or Haunted or something like that. I mean, good God. So I don't know. And I haven't heard any rumors of anybody contemplating one. But then again, the Rapture remix did come as something of a surprise. Did it not? I don't know. Obviously, if one was available, I'd buy it. On the strength of what they did with Rapture. But now, in my heart, I feel this. The songs here are just not up to it. They don't cut the mustard. They really don't. Easily my least favorite of the the post-Blackmore era recordings. And I, worried as I was at the time, things did pick up, obviously. I think Rapture was a stronger effort, and eventually when we got to the Bob Ezrin era, things really started to pick up. I'm glad to say, because based on this, it seemed like the creative juices had kind of dried out a little bit. Yes, they were still prepared to experiment and, throw new ideas around, but the songwriting craft seems to have eluded them on this release. But, a blip. I'm happy to say it turned out to be but a blip. Well, those are my thoughts. Do you agree, do you not agree? Am I too harsh on this? Am I missing its inner beauty? Feel free to comment, let me know. Feel free also to subscribe, to like, to share, and all those other good things. And, as always, I thank you for your indulgence. I wish you well. And until next time, Maçhonquèrre.